Good
Okay.
afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to In Conversation with a Survivor. And today, for our March session, we are honored to have Jack Stern joining us. Jack is the son of Nissen, or Andy Stern, a Holocaust survivor of Auschwitz and several other Nazi concentration camps. Today, Jack will share his father's story of survival during the Holocaust and also share insights from the second generation. Welcome, Jack. If you're ready, let's get started.
Thank you.
So maybe just let's start. Could you tell us a little bit about the world of your parents in pre-war Romania? And where did your father live, and what was life like for his family?
I, I'd be more than happy to, but I want to give a little caveat before is that, everything I'm telling you is things that he told me growing up. We had a very intimate relationship. He talked about his life back home. He talked about, in the concentration camps with me, and he talked about his survival. And then very recently, I watched his Shoah Foundation testimonial.
Mm.
And I watched it with my wife Beth, and I watched it. I hadn't watched it in about 15, 16 years, and I watched it with very different eyes. I think the first time I watched it, and it was all about me, how I felt. And this time around, I watched it, listening to him, how he felt, and everything that he went through. So I'm taking from the testimonial and from my memory of listening and talking to him and putting it all together. Um, he described life. He was born in Dej, which is in Romania, um, on May 2nd, 1926. And he described that it was, relatively good life with his family. His father was a tailor. They had a house. He went to school. He went to public school. Then later on he went to Hebrew school. He went to Cheder. He became his father's apprentice as a tailor at age 9, which he took great pride in.
Mm.
And he said that his father was very proud of him. So that was very, very interesting to hear. And then he talked about 1943, 1944. They before that they always knew about anti-Semitism. They saw it, they felt it, but he said it completely intensified in 1943 and 1944. He talked about in 1943 them the having to wear the yellow star. In 1940, in early 1944, he talked about how all the Jewish businesses were uh, the non-Jews of the town stopped patronizing Jewish businesses. He remembers his dad's business going down. So they were very aware of it. He talked about in public school getting beat up all the time. He had 3 brothers. Uh, one of them was very strong, very athletic, would stick up for them, but he said it intensified uh, a great deal. And then he talked about in uh, in May of 1944 how they were taken from their home. Everything was stripped away from them and taken to the ghetto, which was outside of the town. And he described it as not a ghetto that you see in pictures. He says not the Warsaw Ghetto where it was a city. He basically said it was a field, and they were they
Mm.
were put into the field and they had to fend for themselves.
Wow, that sounds pretty horrific.
Yeah.
Um, And so I guess that's sort of, in a country like Romania, maybe when we talk about when the Holocaust begins, that's a question that might seem obvious on the surface, but it really does begin at different moments in different locations. And so when that ghetto was established, that sort of when for your family the the Holocaust in a way like intensified or became more immediate.
Yeah, so
That's fair.
he talks about how, you know, he doesn't even say like I remember him saying it didn't begin there.
Mm,
Yeah, he said because they experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, but they were told, things were getting really, really bad by May 1943. So they were told that don't worry, we're taking to a place and you're going to be there for a while and we're going to take you to a better place. We're going to take you to a place where you're going to work, there's going to be food, there's going to be housing. It's going to be a better place. So even in the time that he spent uh, in the ghetto, and I think it was 2 or 3 months. I think it was in June when he started his odyssey uh, to the concentration camps. He
mm,
he he talks a lot about how those 3 months were, in limbo. They were trying to fend for themselves. They were trying to get food. He talks about how at night they would sneak out and work for they would find farmers, uh, not Jewish, of course, who they would work, and in return they would get some food, and they would
mm.
sneak it back into the ghetto. And he doesn't really he never really identified that as the beginning of the Holocaust for them. I mean, historically, obviously there's times and places where they would establish that the Holocaust began. But for him, those 3 months was kind of limbo, and there was still hope. They were still in the back of their head that they were going to a better place. He
Mhm.
just wishes, he says that in retrospect, that there should have been community leaders that could have had the 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 foresight, or maybe the ability to tell everybody the truth, so they could have
Mm.
done something different. But he doesn't really, he never really accepted, or he never really declared that the Holocaust began then. I think it was the day that they started moving towards the concentration camps is probably the day that he establishes that it began for him. I guess for him personally and for his family.
Sure. Well, and that's, it can be, I think that's one of those questions that can be difficult to answer and it doesn't need a tidy answer, but maybe that's something that we can talk a little bit about. Could you share? You called it an odyssey, and I think that's a really interesting choice of words. And there's a lot of different camps that your father survived in a way. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yeah, I can. He was he talks about in June, I believe, of 19 or in June of 1944, they were told, now we're going to take you to work.
Okay.
That's what they were told. And they were transported to uh to a town in Romania. So in trains uh called Casio. And I tried looking it up on a map, and I had some difficulty. So it might have been a region, or perhaps a nickname that they gave to this region. And he said it was the Romanians who transported them. And he talks about, he can't remember exactly, but he thinks it was a day of transporting. And um, he spoke to me about the general transporting, but in in his um, in his testimony that he gave, the interviewer asked him, what kind of trains they were, and my dad had some humor, and even in the testimonial, he said to her, he goes, "Well, they weren't passenger trains," was his
Mm.
was his comment to her, and he said the train to Casio as terrible as it wasn't terrible, and he said that the Romanians weren't horrible to them. It wasn't terrible. But
Mm.
when what he said when they got to Casio, um, the Nazis took over the transport. And I believe that they were put on a different train. And he said the moment that they arrived in Casio, um, there was a complete change. It was a complete change in the way they were treated, and understanding that from from Dej to Casio, they weren't treated like first class passengers.
Certainly
So
not. Yeah.
so he talks about how, and he uses the term packed like sardines. He did use that term, and he said that the the Nazis were horrible. The transport itself was horrible, and the transport from Casio was to Auschwitz too. And he said that was a 3 day ordeal. Um, Talked about the conditions. He talked about there was no food, uh, the the human condition, no bathrooms, no food. One thing that resonated with me, and I remember him telling me, and I remember and seeing it in the testimonial. Um, he said, if somebody wanted to lie down, everybody had to lie down. If you're standing up, everybody stood up. And he told me that to in his own way to describe uh, how they were packed in the cattle cars.
Right.
Um, and I do remember uh, talking to him about that. Um, I remember I had an opportunity to visit Yad Vashem, and I had an opportunity to walk. Sorry.
Please don't be sorry.
I had an opportunity to walk into one of the cattle cars, and it was a very emotional, very um, a lot of his conversation resonated back to me. I mean, and
Mhm.
I could stand it for 5 minutes, and it was
Yeah.
empty,
Right.
looking around.
Yeah.
So that first ordeal was 3 days. Um,
Yeah.
and he actually said to me, he said it was about 600 kilometers. I go, how could you remember that? I Googled it. It's
Yeah.
650 kilometers.
Wow.
Like, so there are a lot of, that's another thing that came, there's a lot of detail. Um,
Hmm.
there was a lot of detail in the description. Um, uh, uh,
Wow.
he talks about when they arrived at Auschwitz II, um, men and women were separated. He was with his uh, father, his one grandfather. Uh, his grandfather's name was Chaim, who my son Dustin is named after. Dustin, I'm sure you know you're named after him. And um, he said it's he had aunts as well and uncles. And he said that was the last time he saw his mother. Her name was Bracha. And the last time he saw his sister, her name was Esther. I later found out that they called her Relly, which is a very sweet name. Um, uh, and for whatever it's worth, my dad had light hair, blue eyes, and his sister, Relly, had red hair and I think green eyes. Anyways,
And he was
so
so he was born in 26, so he was 18
he was
roughly
he
when.
was 18.
Okay.
I think his sister was a few years younger. I think she was 14 or 15.
Okay.
Um, my my dad's brother who survived, Eugene wasn't with him, but I could tell the story of how they met up later. He wasn't in the transport, but it was the last time that he saw it was the last time he saw his mother and sister. He says he remembers, if I remember correctly, left was to the gas chambers, right was to the barracks. He recounts how his father pushed him and said, take him. He's strong. He can help you. He's a tailor. And then he remembers his father then pleading for himself and saying, we're both tailors. We could work together. We can, right? But sadly his father was um didn't survive either. Um then he tells me that he was taken to the barracks. Um and he describes the barracks as, he said again, it was very detailed. He said 1,000 men in a barrack. And he said 3 bunks high, and he said 4 men to a bunk. And he remembers the bunk, and he said, um, Jack, it wasn't a camp like you went to or your kids went to. He says the bunk was hard wood. And he described again, if one of your 3 bunkmates wanted to roll over, you all had to roll over. And so he said it was very, very, very confined. And he then says that he spent 3 days at Auschwitz too. He said, and then they were transported to Mauthausen. And with Mauthausen, he said again, it was train. He said, as bad as the guards were, and the train was to Auschwitz too, it was worse to Mauthausen. And he never described to me um, people dying in the transport to Auschwitz too, but he did describe people dying, men dying, um, in the transport from uh, from Auschwitz to Mauthausen.
Mm.
And he did say, he goes, oh, it was a 600 kilometer odyssey. I Googled it. It's 550 kilometers. So the detail was there. He did mention it was a few days. He didn't say exactly, but he said it was a few days transport
Mhm.
to Mauthausen, and he did describe uh multiple deaths in the transport.
Must have been
Uh,
horrific.
and he described in detail how unsanitary it was, how difficult it was, how horrible it was. Uh, Again, all that resonated to me uh, when I had the opportunity to actually stand in one of the cars. Um, it was a very I mean, I haven't thought about it in a long time, but it was a very uh, profound moment of, for 1 minute, not even experiencing it, but for 1 minute, being physically, maybe in the cable car, in the car that he was in. Well, obviously it wasn't, but uh,
Yeah.
to imagine what it was like. Then in Mauthausen, he says uh, he received the uniform, and he described the the gray, the dark gray, or the black and white uh, uniform, and he was assigned his prisoner number. Um, Always uh, 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 his prisoner number is 73543. Um, and he said the prisoner number was uh, on his the chest of his prisoner uniform, and on the pant leg of his prisoner uniform. Uh, I talked a little bit about humor and dark humor. If I could tell, when I remember my parents telling me, and then my dad and my mom and dad showing me a picture of a Hanukkah party. I think it was with one of the synagogues, and I was dressed up as just a prisoner, like with a ball and chain, and I saw the picture. I have it. I'm gonna have to dig it up now, of me. I must have been 3 or 4 years old. There's this old black and white picture of me, like with a prisoner's hat and like a prisoner's uniform. And it looked, I don't know if it was store bought or where it was. And they said, there you are, Jack, you're a jailbird, right? And then I looked at the picture and I said, my God, there's a number on the prisoner. And my dad said, well, we just put my number on your, like, I thought, how morbid, but it was like kind of like I laughed at it. It was like they laughed, like almost funny. But
Well,
anyways, I remember that story very well when I tell the prisoner's number. So he talks about um being in Madhausen, and it says he was in Madhausen not for long,
okay.
because they were then transported from Madhausen to a work camp, a work concentration camp, um, called Melt in Austria.
Okay.
And he said that was a very short transport, about 80 kilometers. And in Melk is where he then spent uh, 10 months.
Okay.
And he describes Melk as a labor camp. The
Yes.
sole purpose was a labor camp. He described it, that every day, early in the morning, they were transported by train to an underground factory.
Okay.
And he describes the underground factory in great detail. Great.
Underground to protect it from bombing from the
Yeah.
Allies, or okay.
He describes the concrete. I think he even said the concrete was 2 meters, like very, very, like in great detail about this labor camp. And he tells that in that factory they built airplanes.
Okay.
They built German fighter airplanes,
Wow.
and he said with the sole purpose of killing. Those were those those were his words. Here is where he really gets into where he talked to me about this is what he considered his concentration camp. Like the other ones, he was there,
Right.
like almost like a guest, like
Okay. Yeah.
passing
Passing
through.
through. Mm-hmm.
But here is where most of his conversation with me would be about, uh, you know, the hardship of, you know, he talks about it was an hour or 2 hours to get there, an hour and 2 hours to come back, 8 hours of work. you
Mm-hmm.
know, here's where a lot of his things that he recounted to me about, his obviously, he talked about the food. And he said the food was much better here because here they needed to keep you alive. But he
Right.
said, you were lucky if you got a piece of bread. And he describes the piece of bread as a piece of dirt, like dark and terrible. And he talks about soup, and the soup was like basically like brown
Mhm.
water, and that was that's how they that's what they were given. And he does talk about that once in a while they were given meat, and he says it was horse meat. um and he said it was all done to keep you alive. And he says he doesn't know how it keeps you alive, and that obsession with food. And he talks to me that all the the talk, the thought only revolved around rest, sleep, so you'd have strength to do it the next day, and food, 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 food. He
Mhm.
talked to me about, I asked him once, I go, like, did you think about, I got to get through this. So I got to, the end of it is going to come. And he said he never thought about it in those terms. He said all he thought about was food,
Mhm.
was, can I get some food? And then he did say to me on a number of occasions, he said, the dream was one day to sit at a table and say, I'm full. I don't need any more bread. He didn't talk about vegetables or meat or pizza or anything. It was like it was bread. He goes,
Mhm.
one day my dream was to sit at a table and say, I've had enough bread. So when I asked him about your fight for survival he says he had little time to philosophize. You had little time to think through because you were so tired and you were so
Right.
afraid. If you fell asleep, the guard was going to shoot you. If you,
Yeah.
did something wrong, you were going to get killed. So he didn't have time to think about survival or about what life could be one day. It was just sleep and one day to have enough food to say, um, I had enough food.
Hmm.
And I also wanted to mention here's where he talked a lot about, and I later understand. I mean, there's millions of stories. Everybody survive. Survival. Every story of a Holocaust survivor could be a Hollywood movie. Like, there's
Yeah.
no doubt.
Agreed.
Every story. And one of the things that I've tried to put together some themes and some themes. One theme I in my own mind I put together is there is luck involved. And there was
Sure.
somewhere, somehow, maybe in every case, and I've not listened to a lot of survivors, but I've listened to a few,
Mhm.
that there was somebody who did something selfless that could have got them killed to help somebody that perhaps led to their survival. And my dad talks about, one instance in Milk where he talks about that he got um, he got very sick. Um, I can't remember what he got a terrible infection in his leg, and
Mhm.
he could barely walk, and he could barely work, and he could barely survive. And he talks about how there was a doctor, a Jewish doctor, who helped him. Went into great detail of what he did to help him, which is I don't think I have to share the details, but he got his strength. And then he talked about how after that, like people around him that he didn't know, prisoners that would camouflage his weakness, like carry him to the train, you know, hold him to where he had to work. And he said where he was working was a manager, he called him. And he said he wasn't Jewish. And he said for a long time, he would get there. And the manager said, you hide under this table
Wow.
and and saved him. So there is
Yep.
sometimes a guardian angel, and the same thing happened um, when he went to Benzi. So he was in Milk for 10 months, very hard. Um, I asked him once if he had a will to survive, and he can't remember it. Like it goes back to just
Mhm.
doing what you need to do.
Right.
Um, and he said as the war was progressing, um, it was probably, I think it was in uh, March or April of 1945. as the Allies were getting closer and in Austria to Melk, they transported everyone from Melk to Abenzi. And Abenzi
Mm.
was 170 kilometers from Melk
Right.
and close to oh the famous city in Austria. I can't remember it. It eludes me. Um,
Vi- Vienna?
par- Pardon me?
Vienna?
Vienna,
Or okay, yeah.
close to Vienna. Um, and he said in Abenzi is where they were taken, and it was a labor camp as well. Um, in the mountains. I've seen pictures of it. It's horrifically beautiful. Like here you had a labor camp and you're in
Yeah.
a very beautiful part of Austria.
Hmm.
And he talks about there that they built munitions.
Right. Okay.
He called them bombs, but whatever you want to refer them to.
Sure.
And he talks about he was there for a little over a month. And that's where he was liberated.
Wow. And that was in 1945.
45. So Abenzi is where I mean I kind of all the stories he was telling me, but I'm as many people will tell you I'm the glass is half full type of person. So I started focusing on um Abenzi with him
Hmm.
because that's where he was liberated. So
Sure. It's yeah.
I wanted to know as much as I could about Abenzi.
Right.
Um, and he said, May 4th, which was his birthday, was the day he was liberated. So I looked it up and it was there's some people say May 4th, some people say May 6th, but that was the day he was liberated, and he was liberated by the 80th Infantry Division, the U.S. Army. Um, and he talks a lot about um, being liberated.
Mm.
He talks a lot about the American soldiers, how um, very compassionate they were, how they were good. He said
Right. Well,
they
good.
were
It must have been incredibly shocking for a lot of them, as young soldiers to
yeah,
see the
yeah,
conditions that
yeah. He
people were
talks
living
about that
in.
a lot. He talked about that a lot. And he said a lot of them were his age, like his contemporaries.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Um, um, and there was a guardian angel. I want to go back to it at Abenzi. He said, like as the Nazis knew that the day was coming, very close, and I can't remember if he said it was the Liberation Day or um, or or close to it. He talks about the guards gathered all the prisoners and they said, "We're going to take you to the underground tunnels where you worked. And we're going to take you there because it's underground. We're going to protect you." And he talks about a, again, he calls him a manager. He talks about um, a German lawyer who was my dad called him a political prisoner,
Mm.
who said, "Don't go." Like he surrounded them and he said, "Don't go, don't go, don't go." Um, and they didn't. Um, and I think he said maybe some did. And he said the Germans bombed those tunnels to
Mm.
try to, you know, get rid of the evidence and try to kill more prisoners. So this is another example. My dad said this guy, this man saved them. I I started researching the story, and in the story of the liberation of Abenzi, it's
Yeah.
documented that this actually happened.
Wow.
They don't give his name, but they documented that this happened. So again, here's the second stroke of luck, the second individual who, it's a theme. Somebody did
Incredible. Something something
somebody did
heroic.
something very selfless. So,
Absolutely.
my dad talks about um I just want to, give you a little bit of background. Definitely, knowing what we know now, my dad absolutely suffered from PTSD. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely. But I will tell you, you know, reading of what are the symptoms and reading of he was an incredible actor,
Mm.
keeping it from our family. Like, absolutely. Now, knowing what I know,
Mhm.
definitely, you know, um, he did. But he recounts the stories and he tells the stories. And the point I want to make is that until his testimonial, my dad was not an emotional man. Like,
Mm.
like I I have no regrets with my father ever. Like, I would tell him I love him. He would
Yeah.
tell me he loves me. He told my brother and sister I could, there was a lot of love in the family, but he was not an emotional man. Like, I never saw him, in the great highs, he was even. In the great
Mm.
lows, he was even. I never saw him express any emotion, any tear, anything. But in his testimonial, there are a few times where he started weeping. And for me to see that was like something I'd never seen before. Never, ever, ever, ever. And um, describing his family was one of the times he got very emotional, in the testimonial,
Mm.
and talking about the nurses and the soldiers, American soldiers, and the nurses who took care of him and his, you know, and the Jews in Abenzi after they were liberated. He gets very emotional about that. And he talks about a lot of death after the liberation. Talks about a lot of prisoners dying of, I don't know what it is, of what it was, but he said that, all of a sudden there's food and you're eating food. And he talks about so many prisoners dying of probably food related sickness.
I think
Um,
it's a strain on the digestive
yeah, and
system
he
and
talks about it. And he
when
said he doesn't know why. He doesn't know why, but he didn't eat a lot. He said he wasn't, and he said a soldier gave him chocolate milk.
Mm.
And he said he was able to digest chocolate milk. And he credits drinking chocolate milk to
That's what
gaining his strength.
revived him. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And uh one of the things I did, which was I cannot believe it to, I'll tell you what happened. I was, a couple of months ago, I was asked to speak at my sister-in-law Jill's school to grade six students. And I was just doing a little preparing. I've done it a couple of times, but it resonated with me and I was very happy to do it. And I was doing just a little bit of research, and that was basically the reason why I watched Dad's testimonial again, just
Right.
to get familiar with the story. Um, and he, all these details. And I said, boy, and I started researching the details, and it was uh, very satisfying that everything he said, I was able
Right. No,
to
to have
find,
the
the story
confirmation
about the
through the
lawyer. It's
research.
documented. Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
it was very, very rewarding to me that he was telling me the truth. right? It was just,
Absolutely. And
it
it kind
felt
of
really
inspires you
good.
to keep researching and keep on that journey of discovery.
Yeah. And like, you know, listen, when you hear something all your life
Hmm.
and you assume it's the truth, right? And then you
Yeah.
go out and find out maybe, and you have a doubt, oh my God, maybe it's exaggerated. Maybe it's not the truth, but it's the truth that I know. But then you're able to, oh my God, it really is the truth. It just made me feel really good
No,
on a
that is
personal note.
special. Absolutely.
Anyway, so I stumbled on a website of a Benzie, of the talked about the liberation of a Benzie. And
Mhm.
this is where all the things my dad said were quantified.
Yeah.
Anyways, there was a 2-minute video that they had on the website. I clicked on and I started watching it, and they don't quite say where it was. I think it was either it could have been a soldier or Red Cross, and there's no audio to it. And I'm watching it, and I'm watching it, and I come to a point where they're scanning some prisoners, and in my heart, there's no doubt in my mind, like I found my dad. Like here he
Wow.
is in the video, and it was taken probably the day or the day after, a couple days after the liberation. And I just was wow, like
That's
there,
incredible.
there he is. And I will tell you, forever and ever, whenever I would see pictures or anything on the Holocaust, I always had this, like I was looking extra close, like, could my,
Mm,
could that be
yeah.
Dad? Could that be Andy? And here it was, like on that day, I saw my dad. Like it was just
Wow.
and I spread it around to some very close, family and some people, and um a lot of people said, "Oh my God, that's Dustin, your son." And some people said it's me, but I see it. I see Dustin 100% um, in his face. So
Wow.
it was incredible.
That's quite the experience. Um, and I'm just looking at the time, and we've got a lot of great questions coming into the chat as well. But thank you so much, Jack, for sharing all of those. I think, as you said, you have a lot of detailed information about your father's experiences, and it to have the video, the Shoah Foundation video, it is really, I think, special to have those insights directly, through his own voice, and now you can also having those words, you can fill in the gaps through your own research. Um, Maybe we can talk just briefly a little bit about anti-Semitism, post-war Romania. Your father, after liberation, was he in a displaced persons camp? What was life like
Yeah.
in
So
that
so
period? Yeah.
so in the Benzi,
Hmm.
again, I have no idea how these things happen, but he talks about that he got word, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, not on his cell phone, but he got word that his brother Eugene might be alive.
Wow.
So he he talks about how at Benzi, the Americans gave him papers, and he by truck, by train, by foot, and I think it's over 1,000 kilometers for sure, finds his way back to Dej.
Okay.
And miracle of miracles, he finds his brother who's there. And my uncle, there's a great story on his survival. He was in Budapest, found his way back, found his way back to Dej. And my uncle Eugene, uh, Dad said his name was Yiddle, but Eugene is what we knew him as. Um, and I'm still very close with his kids, my cousin Gary and my cousin Doreen, and their families and spouses, and uh, we're very close. They find each other, um, and my dad said, talked about the emotion. He goes,
Hmm.
I found him, but it was hard for me to show excitement. I said, Dad, you found him. He goes, I found him. He does say that at night when my uncle would be sleeping, he hugged him. So,
Hmm.
you know, anyways, they were there, and my dad said in his mind, and he said to his brother, he goes, there is nothing here for us. He said, nothing has changed. There's still a hatred for Jews. He says, we have to find our way to a new life, to a country that will embrace us, that will take us in. So there was that thinking. And then he said he was harsh with his brother. He said, I'm leaving. And I know, he says, Germany, of all places, Munich, they got word that's where to go. From there, you can go wherever.
Right.
So my dad tells me, he said to his brother Eugene, you either come with me or you don't, but we're going. But I'm going. And
Yep.
they went. And they went to they found their way. So he says his journey to Dej was a legal journey. I don't know
Okay.
what that means, but they had paper. But he says his journey from Dej to Munich was an illegal journey,
Okay. Wow.
going and getting there. And they found their way to I think it's Ferverwald. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is where they went. He says it was
Yep.
on the outskirts of Munich. That's where they landed. My dad says him and his brother, he was there for 3 years
Okay.
in the displacement camp. And he describes the displacement camp as being, he goes, all the food we wanted, freedom, we could come and go. We went to Munich. And I said, what did you do? He goes, I did some tailoring. He goes, I worked, as he calls himself, a bushman. That's what he
Okay.
said. Work, and he goes, was free to do whatever I want. I go, and what did you do? He goes, we we just needed time to become, he didn't use the word normal, just they needed time to settle down.
Hmm.
That's what he said. And 2 years into their stay, the Canadian government gets a table, word goes out and says they're looking for lumberjacks. And it's folklore in our family. My uncle Eugene, who was all of 5 feet, goes to the Canadian table and they say, are you a lumberjack? And he says, not only am I a lumberjack, my father was a lumberjack and his father was a lumberjack. And I don't even think my uncle knew what a lumberjack was. Um, and he was granted papers to immigrate to Canada. He did. Um, and um, him and his beautiful wife, my Aunt Bertha, who was a survivor as well. Um, a year later, my dad was sponsored and landed in Nova Scotia in December of 1948.
Wow.
And December is a really mystical month for us, but um, that's when he met my mother in December, Hanukkah. Um, my mother died, but their 30 days was in December. There's a lot of December in our family, and Hanukkah is a big time in our family, and it always
Right.
was.
Yeah.
Um, and my dad immigrated to Canada, lived with my aunt and uncle for a long time. And My cousin Doreen tells me the story that one day my aunt said to my dad, you got 6 months to find yourself a bride and get out of here. Um, and he did. He met my beautiful mother um, at a Hanukkah party. Um, and
Wow.
they were married shortly thereafter.
Beautiful couple. That's an incredible story. Thank you so much, Jack. I just because of time and I see we have a lot of incredible questions here. I'm gonna just start
Can I
reading
give
through.
one thing?
You
I want to
please.
talk about my mother and the impact that she had on my
I
dad.
would love to hear. I think, yeah, we need to hear about your mother as well.
So growing up, I went to Associated Hebrew Day School,
Okay.
and you were either a child of a Holocaust survivor, you were either the child of a Holocaust survivor or
Right.
you weren't.
Okay.
It
Those are
was
the
it
two
was
the two categories.
it was that it was basically that simple.
Hmm.
And I had friends who were both parents were Holocaust survivors. And I will
Hmm.
tell you, walking into those homes, and um, they were very dark homes, not in
Hmm.
light, but in spirit, and very, very dark, very sad. And,
Yeah.
you know, and I do that and I go, there's something doesn't mix, because, you know, our house was a house of, um, it was very different. My mother, rest her soul, was Moroccan,
Mm.
uh, larger than life. Uh, you'd think that we were brought up in beside railroad tracks. It was loud, it was a rambunctious house, and it was a happy house,
Mm.
right? I mean, I think I get a lot of that from my mother, but we knew about my dad. But my mother brought,
Mm.
sorry, she brought all the goodness, all the, whatever joy she could bring out from him, she brought out. And I know there was PTSD. And then I know, but I could tell you that his life was enriched by her. It was just, she brought out everything that she could in her goodness. So our home was not a home of survivors.
Mm.
And it was a welcoming home. It was bright, it was rambunctious, it was happy. My brother and sister can give you different stories. My brother Glenn, my sister Brenda can give you different ideas about it, but it was happy. It
Mm.
wasn't this home of a Holocaust survivor, which I think is so profound, which is a testament to this beautiful woman.
To the yeah, absolutely, the
Yeah,
influence that she had on your
a-
life, and the the fact that
absolutely.
love probably was something
Absolutely.
that was
And I
healing
know
for your
there's a lot
mother.
of there's
Yeah.
discussion about you know children of survivors. There's,
Yep.
you carry it in your DNA, and there's suffering. And I I I could tell you that my memories and all the experiences with my dad are so positive.
Mm.
My sorrow is that he went through it, and I couldn't, that, there's nothing I can do about it. But I carry more of my mother's,
Mm.
optimism, but she's the reason why our house was why our house was.
Thank you. That's so important to remember. And I think that spirit that your mother embodied is something that really has carried the Jewish people through a lot of
Yeah,
hatred
yeah,
and
yeah,
anti-Semitism.
yeah.
I do. So Agnes Klein shared that Kasha or Kashau is a town in Romania, just to confirm that for you. And also, we have questions about the distance between some places. Do you know of any, in Melk, do you know if there were any sabotage efforts with like some of them? It's hard to say, right? There may have been
Hard to
passive
say. There may have been,
resistance.
do they want to make
Yeah,
a faulty airplane? Do they want to make a faulty bomb? It,
right.
it makes sense. It's not a conversation I had with my dad.
Right. And something that I think is to keep in mind is that, if you were caught sabotaging something as important as, an airplane, it would be a very serious crime as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, and okay. Some really interesting, I love when people share information about, some of the towns and locations where there used to be a significant Jewish community, destroyed in many ways by the Holocaust, but still this memory that we have of families and that connection to these towns. Um, Jan, Jan or Jan, thank you, Mr. Stern, for your testimonial. Your father spoke openly with you about his experiences during the Holocaust. I'm wondering if this made a difference to your growing up. In my work with Holocaust survivors, many families never shared their experiences. So did your
I,
father?
I I
Yeah,
only know what I know. Like I don't
sure.
know if it made a
Yeah.
difference, right? Like had he not shared, would I be a different person? I only know what I know that listen, I'm enriched
Yeah.
by him sharing these experiences with me. Um, I will tell you, so I don't know. I can't answer that, but I will tell you, he talked about it. He wasn't in your face about it. He would he
Mm,
would if anybody asked questions, he would certainly answer and he would certainly engage in the conversation. I could tell you I remember on multiple occasions friends of mine in our home asking him, talking to him.
mm.
So he would always talk about it, but he never went
Right.
out of his way to talk about it. So am I enriched? Absolutely. Am I like it's part of me? Like uh and I will tell you, doing this is so comforting to me
Mm.
in the sense that it makes me like I miss him
Yeah.
so dearly.
Yeah.
Um, and it makes me feel closer to him. Um, I was when he died, I was very angry.
Mm.
Uh, when he died, I was angry for myself that I was being cheated.
Yeah.
Um, and I was angry more for him. You know, he died at 74, and I felt, my God, you're enjoying life now. You're traveling, you have grandchildren.
Hmm.
And I felt if I have a minute to tell a story, I don't know if I could get through it.
Please,
Um,
no, you have a minute. Absolutely.
two
More than that.
very dear friends of mine,
Hmm.
Susie and Lenny Rodness, knew of my anger, knew of my grief.
Hmm.
And very shortly after, Susie's father, Barry, was involved in a charity and brought in Elie Wiesel. And they both knew how I wanted to meet him. He was a hero of mine. He was born in Romania, and I always wanted to meet him. And they arranged for me to meet him. And unfortunately, I was at the time I was traveling a great deal for work, and I wasn't able to meet him.
Mm.
Well, I was devastated. But shortly thereafter, um, Susie and Lenny called me, they came over, they gave me a gift, and it was a book that he personally signed to me, which I still cherish to this day. And they said, Jack, I hope you don't mind. We told Mr. Wiesel about your dad. And we also told him how you feel cheated for yourself and for your, and I go, oh my God, that's like I mean, I'm not an angry man, but I was angry.
Mm.
You know, I lost my father, my rock, my confidant.
Yeah.
Um, and they said, he has a message for you. Um, and I don't share this often. And when I do, I completely break down. I apologize. I'm going to try to get through it. And he said that the message that Elie Wiesel gave to me personally was that in his darkest day of the Holocaust, somebody would have said to your dad, not only are you going to survive, you're going to flourish. You're going to end up in a country that you love. And he was a huge patriot. He loved Canada. And he said, you're going to meet a beautiful woman. You're going to have three great kids. My brother and sister and me, we're great kids. And you're gonna have grandkids. And I'm gonna share one other thing when I'm done. And you're gonna live a good life. You're gonna take care of your family. You're gonna build a home. You're gonna build a life, and you're gonna guide your kids to a good life. And Mr. Wiesel said, your dad would have never imagined that. So he said, tell your friend, me, not to focus on the time that he was here, but on what he accomplished.
Wow.
Um, and that brings me comfort. And if I want to say one other thing, and I hope my son Dustin and my daughter-in-law Rachel don't mind, if my if my dad is definitely smiling, everything comes in circle. Um, I have two beautiful, we have two beautiful granddaughters, He has
Mm.
two beautiful great grandchildren, and one of them, the eldest, Andy Stern, is named after my dad. And that was a gift from uh, Dustin and Rachel uh, to me, to the family. I think that's incredible.
That's so beautiful. And thank you for the gift of sharing Eli Wiesel's message to you and your father's journey and just everything you've said today, Jack. It's been really a pleasure to speak with you and to hear just your wisdom that you have to share and the journey that you're on. So thank you so much. And I know that we've got a lot of beautiful messages in the chat here and questions that you might want to also think about and answer. So we'll make sure we save those for you and send them directly to you, okay?
Thank you. So it's my honor to do this. It continues his legacy, and in a selfish way, it makes me feel closer to him.
It does, absolutely. And now that we all here today know about his journey, we're a part of that, we keep that memory as well, and we will carry that forward. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for listening today. See you again soon.
Thank you.